The city had been abandoned for 11 years. That was what the intelligence reports said. 11 years since the last family dragged their belongings through the eastern gate and never looked back. 11 years since the water stopped running and the electricity went dark and the streets became the property of wind and silence and slowly spreading rust. The buildings still stood, most of them concrete towers and narrow commercial blocks and a cathedral whose bell had not rung since the last winter of the occupation. But they stood the way old men stand near the end. Upright from habit, not from strength. Something essential already gone from the interior. Sergeant First Class Derek Calloway did not care about any of that. What Calloway cared about was the wind. It was coming from the northwest at an estimated 12 knots, gusting to 18, carrying the kind of cold that did not respect the layering system the army issued or the hand warmers tucked against his palms. It was the cold that preceded snow, that dense, anticipatory cold that the air assumes when it is preparing to release something. He had grown up in Minnesota. He recognized it the way you recognize a neighbor's face. Not by thinking, just by knowing. Calloway. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb's voice came through the earpiece, low and practiced. You've got eyes on the eastern approach? Clear. Keep it that way. The unit was 12 men. Alpha Team 6 operators pushing up through the southern quarter, clearing what the briefing had called light infrastructure obstruction, which turned out to mean a collapsed section of the old market road that required them to pick their way through concrete rubble single file. Bravo Team Calloway's element. 6 men had taken the parallel route through what remained of a residential district, apartment blocks on both sides, windows dark and empty, their glass mostly gone, replaced by wind. The mission was a recovery operation. Intelligence had flagged a communications relay station in the old municipal building at the city center pre-war hardware. Apparently still intact and potentially operable, worth retrieving or destroying before adversarial forces could exploit it. 3 hours in, 3 hours out. Simple. The briefing had said, no indication of active enemy presence. Intermittent signals consistent with automated equipment. Probability of contact, low. Calloway had been in enough briefings to understand what probability of contact, low actually meant. It meant, we don't know what's in there, but we're sending you anyway. The Sentry drone, a small quadrotor assigned to Overwatch, had lost its feed 47 minutes into the approach. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Foster, commanding from the forward observation post 4 kilometers east, had attributed it to interference from the old industrial equipment in the city's manufacturing quarter. Possible. The city was full of dead metal and corroded conduit, the kind of electromagnetic environment that played havoc with consumer-grade signals. Possible. But Calloway noted the time. 3:14. He noted the direction of the drone's last known position, northwest, toward the Cathedral District. He did not mention this to Webb. He filed it in the part of his mind where he kept things that had not yet revealed what they were. The snow began at 3:22. Not heavy, not yet. A fine, dry particulate that the wind picked up and scattered horizontally, reducing visibility and doing something unpleasant to the night vision optics. The streets became suggestions. The far ends of blocks dissolved into white noise. Shadows that had been buildings became shapes, and shapes became suggestions, and suggestions became nothing. Corporal James Rafferty, walking point for Bravo, raised a fist. The elements stopped. Movement? Webb subvocalized. No. A pause. Just. The street looks different than the map. How so? Debris field. Wasn't on the overlay. Calloway looked at it. A scatter of masonry and twisted rebar across the mouth of the next intersection, radiating from the corner of a building that had partially collapsed. He studied the collapse. The break point was relatively clean, not weathered the way 11-year-old damage weathers. He could not be certain in this light, in this snow, but his judgment said the collapse was recent. Months? Not years. He said nothing. They moved around the debris field. At 3:31, Alpha Team reported their position, northeast quadrant, approaching the municipal building from the south face. All clear, no anomalies. Lieutenant Colonel Foster, monitoring from the OPD, confirmed the timing. On schedule. Simple. The snow thickened. Calloway found himself doing what he did when something was wrong, but he couldn't name it yet, cataloging. The drone loss. The debris. The particular quality of the silence, which was not the silence of an empty city. That silence had texture, the creak of settling metal, the knock of wind in empty frames, but a different silence, a waiting silence, the kind that something living creates when it stops moving. He had felt this before, in 2 other cities that the briefings had described as low probability. He wanted to say something to Webb. He composed it in his mind. Something's off. I can't give you specifics. The silence is wrong. He knew how that would land. He kept walking. At 3:38, Specialist Conrad Briggs, rear security for Bravo team, said, "What was that?" Everyone stopped. "What was what?" "Webb. I thought I heard a pause." "Nothing." "Never mind. Wind." They kept walking. Private First Class Tyler Novak went down at 3:41. He was walking second in the column, behind Rafferty, when he simply stopped. No cry, no stumble, the way a machine stops when the power cuts, not a fall so much as a cessation. His legs folded beneath him and he was on the ground before anyone understood that a transition had occurred. Rafferty spun. Novak. He saw Novak's helmet. The entry point. The terminal stillness that is not unconsciousness and not sleep. Novak is down. Rafferty's voice, to his credit, did not break. It was flat and loud and professional. "He's down. He's down." Webb. "Position. Position. Who's got eyes?" Calloway was already dropping to a knee, turning, scanning. The street ran east-west. The shot, if it was a shot, had come where? He had heard nothing. Not a suppressed crack, not a compression wave. Nothing. The snow fell. The wind moved. Novak was dead in the street. Snap. Snap, everyone against the wall. Webb pushed Rafferty toward the building face on the left. The element compressed. 6 men with their backs to brick, weapons up, breathing hard. Calloway was scanning the rooftops, the windows, the angles. Nothing. "What direction?" Webb demanded. "I don't know," Calloway said. And that was the truth, and it was the wrong answer, and there was no better one. "He was hit in the head," Rafferty said. His voice had changed, still controlled, but with something behind it, something trying to get out. "Northwest aspect. The entry angle, so northwest. That's 400 meters of rooftops. Alpha. Alpha. This is Bravo. We have a man down. Possible sniper. Northwest quadrant. No shot heard. Repeat, no audio signature on the shot. Over." Alpha's response crackled back through interference. "Copy. Bravo. Confirm, no shot heard. Over." Confirmed. Nothing. A silence that felt different from the silence before. Staff Sergeant Aaron Pruitt, Alpha's lead, had been in enough places to hear what was not being said. "Subsonic," he said. "Has to be subsonic." "At what range?" Webb said. "Depends on the load. Could be far. Could be very far." Calloway was watching the northwest. The rooftop line, broken and irregular, buildings of different heights creating notches and angles, a geometry of possible positions that, even if you narrowed it to the subsonic envelope, still offered dozens of viable shooting positions. He was trying to triangulate from Novak's body, from the entry angle Rafferty had described. From the wind was a factor. Subsonic rounds were susceptible to wind drift, which meant the shooter had accounted for the 12-knot crosswind, which meant another man went down. Corporal Briggs, rear security, dropped hard against the wall, not clean. Not the terminal stillness of Novak, but a heavy, wrong impact against the brickwork, then down. Calloway spun. Briggs was breathing. Shoulder. High. Man down. Man down. Briggs is hit. Shoulder. Pull him in. Pull him in. Calloway grabbed Briggs's plate carrier and hauled. Briggs made a sound, pain and fear and something that was almost a question. The kind of sound a person makes when they cannot understand what is happening to their body. "You're okay," Calloway said. "Stay with me. You're okay." He did not know if Briggs was okay. "2 shots, Webb said. 2 shots and no one heard a damn thing." "We need to move," Rafferty said. "Move where?" someone said. And no one answered. It was Specialist Kevin Hartley who broke first. Not in the way that word implies, not panic, not cowardice, but in the way that a structure breaks under load it was never designed to carry. He had been second rear security, watching south. He had been watching south because that was his assignment, because the training says cover your sector, and he had been covering it with discipline and focus while 2 men were hit from the opposite direction. The helplessness of that, the enforced uselessness of professional competence was what broke him. He moved. He left his position against the wall and sprinted across the street toward a doorway on the north side. Calloway saw him move and knew it was wrong and had his mouth open to call him back when the doorframe next to Hartley's head exploded in a spray of old brick dust. Hartley threw himself through the door. "Hartley," Webb's voice, razor-edged. "Report, I'm in." Hartley's voice came back, shaking but present. "I'm inside the building, 1st floor. I'm okay. Don't you move from that position." "Sope." The radio was lighting up. Alpha, hearing the contact reports, had halted its advance and gone to ground behind the rubble field near the municipal building's south face. Lieutenant Colonel Foster was on the net from the OPD. Bravo. Confirm your status. Over. 3 casualties, 1 Kia, 2 wounded. Sniper activity. Northwest quadrant. No shot audio. No target acquired. Requesting Webb stopped. Something had occurred to him, something that all of them were starting to feel. Requesting guidance. Over. Foster's response, when it came, carried the particular cadence of a senior officer who is trying to sound less uncertain than he is. Maintain current positions. We're working the drone asset. Over. The drone is down, sir. Working on that. Stand by. Calloway, against the wall, was running through what he knew. 1. The shooter was using subsonic ammunition, which meant suppressed fire, which meant the noise signature was below the threshold of human hearing at any significant distance. This required specialized equipment, a precision weapon, purpose-built subsonic loads, a quality suppressor, not a scavenger, not an opportunist, someone who came here prepared. 2. Both hits had been precision shots, Novak instantly fatal, Briggs wounded in the shoulder rather than killed, which could mean a miss, but the angle was wrong for a miss. It was not a miss. The shoulder hit was intentional. 3. No return fire had drawn a response. When Hartley sprinted across the street and the round had impacted the doorframe, that shot was a warning or a herd. It had been directed to push Hartley through a specific door, not to kill him. Calloway went still with that realization. He turned it over, examined it from every angle. Hartley was still alive inside a building in a city where a precision sniper was demonstrably operational and had previously achieved headshots at range in poor visibility. Hartley was alive because the sniper had chosen to shoot a doorframe instead of Hartley, which meant the sniper had, for whatever reason, wanted Hartley inside that building. Webb, Calloway said, his voice very quiet. What? We need to get Hartley out of that building. Webb looked at him. Now, Calloway said. Before Webb could respond, 2 things happened simultaneously. Specialist Marcus Chen, on the far end of the element, raised his weapon and fired a short burst, northwest, at a shadow or a shape or something only he had seen, and the radio erupted with Alpha's voice. Contact. We have no. It's we don't have visual. We don't have who's shooting. And then a third thing happened that stopped everyone. A voice came through the team radio. Not from any member of either team. A voice that was calm and even and slightly formal, carrying the cadence of someone who had prepared what they were going to say and saw no reason to dramatize it. Stop running. You're making it easier. Female, American accent. Unhurried. The channel went dead. For approximately 4 seconds, no one on either team said anything. She had been in position since 2. She did not use electronic optics. She did not use thermal imaging or image intensification or laser rangefinders. She used what she had trained herself to use over 9 years of practice. The calculation of wind effect on ballistic trajectory, estimated from the sound of air moving through gaps in the structures above her, the geometry of approach routes, memorized from a map she had studied until the city's layout existed as a spatial understanding in her body rather than a visual image in her mind. The rhythm of moving humans in a tactical formation, which has its own grammar, the spacing, the pace variation. The micro-pauses that indicate scanning or hesitation. She had read their entry 17 minutes before they were inside her engagement radius. Her position was in the Cathedral Tower, 340 meters northwest of the main axis of Bravo Team's approach corridor. The tower had not been the obvious choice. It was obvious in a different sense, the obvious to the enemy sense, the position any competent counter-sniper would consider first. But obvious positions are not necessarily wrong positions. They are wrong positions if the enemy is looking for you. She had ensured, through patient and methodical work over the preceding 48 hours, that no one was looking for her. She had removed or obscured every indicator of presence. She had not used the access route that a tactical analysis of the tower would suggest. She had not used artificial light or electronic equipment above the threshold that the city's ambient electromagnetic signature would mask. She had come in cold, stayed cold, and the city had absorbed her the way cold things absorb cold. The first shot had taken 4 seconds of calculation. Wind drift at the estimated range 280 meters to the lead element was 3.1 centimeters for the subsonic load she was using, corrected to 2.8 at the actual range she had refined through careful observation of the formation's pace and the landmarks she had pre-designated. The target had been the point man Rafferty, but Rafferty had moved unexpectedly at the last moment, stepping right to avoid a piece of debris, and the shot had taken the man behind him instead. She had not intended to kill on the first shot. She had intended to mark the presence of fire without revealing the source, to initiate the confusion phase of the engagement. The terminal result of the first shot had been a function of the target's movement, not her intention. She made note of this. In her understanding of an engagement, precision was not merely marksmanship. Precision was the alignment between intended outcome and actual outcome. The first shot had deviated, she adjusted. The second shot, Briggs' shoulder, had been exactly what she intended. A non-fatal hit that would require a man to assist, reducing the effective combat strength of the element from 6 to 4 while simultaneously creating a casualty management problem that would occupy their attention and their radio traffic. She watched the element compress against the wall. She watched them trying to triangulate. She had placed the first shot from a position 2 floors below her current. One she had moved during the element's reaction, and the ricochet pattern of the round's terminal energy would suggest an angle of fire inconsistent with her current position. They would look at the wrong building. They would look for approximately 40 seconds before the available evidence ceased to provide useful direction. Then they would stop looking and start reacting. She had planned for this. When Hartley ran, she aimed not at Hartley but at the doorframe 12 centimeters to his right at the moment she estimated he would be crossing the threshold. The calculation was not the shot. The calculation was the geometry of the building's interior, specifically the absence of a clear line of fire from Hartley's new position to any position her element would subsequently need to occupy. She had put him where he could not observe and not be observed. She had removed him from the equation. She moved to her third position. The radio transmission had been 23 words. She had patched into their frequency through a passive intercept device she had placed on a utility conduit near Alpha Team's approach route. She did not need to say more than 23 words. She needed them to know in the body, not just the mind, that the radio was no longer private, that the darkness was no longer empty. Psychological dominance is not a supplement to tactical dominance. It is the same thing, expressed differently. She was already in her fourth position before anyone in either team began to move again. The decision to split was Webb's, and Calloway understood why he made it, and knew it was wrong before the order finished leaving Webb's mouth. Bravo to Calloway. Rafferty, Chen push north. Get eyes on the cathedral tower. Bravo. 1 with me, south side. Try to get Briggs to cover. Alpha maintains. The logic was sound in a world where the threat was operating from a fixed position. You flank. You get eyes on the angle. You establish cross coverage. But Calloway had been cataloging. The threat had not fired from a fixed position. The first shot and the second shot had different angles, small difference, but real, meaning the shooter had moved between the first and second round. The round that hit Hartley's doorframe had come from a third angle, and the woman's voice on the radio had overlapped with the sound of Hartley's impact, meaning the transmission had been recorded or triggered remotely, not spoken in real time. She was not where they thought she was. She had never been where they thought she was. He pushed north with Rafferty and Chen anyway, because the alternative was to stand against a wall and wait for more people to die. The northern route took them through a narrow service alley between 2 apartment blocks, single file, which Calloway hated and had no way to avoid. Rafferty led, Chen followed. Calloway held rear, watching back, watching up, watching the roofline geometry as it scrolled past above him. At the north end of the alley, the street opened into a small square, a pre-war public space. A fountain at the center, dry, cracked, rimmed with ice, buildings on 3 sides. On the 4th side, northwest, the cathedral rose, its tower visible above the rooftops, its face in shadow. Rafferty stopped at the alley mouth. Open ground, he said. Hold, Calloway said. He studied the square. The fountain was cover, poor, but real. The buildings on the east and south sides had ground floor doorways. The cathedral was 180 meters. The tower was elevated, which meant a downward angle of fire, which meant a different calculation from a level grade engagement. The bullet would track lower than a horizontal shot at equivalent range. The shooter would need to compensate up. The margin of error for a miss would tend to be long rather than short. Something moved in the square, not a person. A shadow that moved wrong, too smooth, too quiet and resolved, after 2 seconds of hard looking, into a piece of plastic sheeting caught in the wind, billowing and dropping and billowing again from a broken window on the east side. Rafferty exhaled. It's just debris, Chen said. Don't move yet, Calloway said. The plastic sheeting moved again, and in the moment it moved, in the half second that Calloway's eyes were drawn to it, He registered something in his peripheral vision, a change in the light on the cathedral's second-story windows. Not a reflection, not a gleam. A movement behind the glass or where the glass had been a brief darkening in a specific pane, the kind of darkening that a body crossing behind a window produces. Second story, not the tower. She's not in the tower, he said. He turned to tell Rafferty, and found that Rafferty was already moving. Rafferty had made his own calculation about the open ground and decided the plastic sheeting had been the threat indicator and it was not a threat. And now Rafferty was across the alley mouth and 3 steps into the square before Calloway's hand came out to stop him. The shot came from the east building, not the cathedral, not the tower. The east building, which was on their flank, which they had passed in the alley, which they had been moving toward as cover. Rafferty went down. He was hit in the leg. He was alive. He was down. He was making sounds that were half pain and half something that Calloway could not categorize, the sounds of a man trying to understand what has happened to him. Back. Calloway pulled Rafferty by the collar, backward, into the alley mouth. Chen was already returning fire east building, 3rd floor, though Calloway was certain, with a particular certainty that comes from having been wrong enough times to recognize what right feels like, that Chen was firing at a position the shooter had already vacated. In his earpiece, Webb's voice, strained, "Bravo 2, report. Rafferty is down," Calloway said. "We have contact from the east building, not the cathedral. East building, she moved. Webb, she is moving between shots. Do not hold position, she knows where we are and we do not know where she is." A silence on the net. Then Webb understood. "We're in the factory block, south side. We took fire 30 seconds ago. She pushed us in here, Calloway. She pushed us in here. She pushed us where she wanted us, and there it was." Calloway had known it and not said it, and now both elements of Bravo team were where the shooter had wanted them. Split, separated by open ground that neither could cross, with their casualties, in the positions she had selected. Alpha team had still not moved. They were pinned behind the rubble field, 400 meters south. The city held 12 men inside it and 1 woman, and the woman was ahead on every count. The voice came again at 4-9. Both teams, same channel. That was the part that was hardest to process, not what she said, but the implication of the transmission itself, which was that she had been listening to them coordinate for the past 28 minutes. She had heard Webb's decisions in real time. She had heard the casualty reports. She had heard Lieutenant Colonel Foster trying to reach a drone that was gone and an asset that was not coming. She had heard everything. "The factory exit faces south," the voice said. "The south approach is covered." Then nothing. In the factory block, Webb stood very still. He counted his men. Himself, 2 operators, Briggs with his shoulder wrapped and his color wrong. He looked at the factory exit. It faced south. He had been considering whether to push south, toward Alpha, try to link up. He had been talking through it on the net 5 minutes ago, not in exact words, but in the kind of oblique tactical language that he had assumed was unclear to anyone who didn't have the context. "She had the context. She's on our frequency," one of the men said. It was not a new realization, but saying it aloud made it real in a new way. "We know," Webb said, "so we need to change. She'll know we're changing. She knows we know." The silence that followed that particular realization had a specific quality. It was the silence of men who have begun to understand the actual scale of what they are dealing with. In the alley, Calloway had Rafferty's leg tourniquet applied, Chen providing what cover he could from the alley mouth, and his mind working through the problem with the cold focus that extreme situations sometimes produce. He was not panicking. He had passed through a region that might have been panic, on the other side of which was a kind of clarity, not confidence, but precision. He was thinking clearly because there was nothing left to do but think clearly. The voice on the radio. The timing of the transmissions. She had said, the first time, "Stop running. You're making it easier." 8 words. She had said it when the team was already against the wall and not running, which meant she was not describing their current behavior. She was describing the behavior she was trying to prevent. She was offering a direction. And the second transmission. The factory exit faces south. The south approach is covered. Not a warning in the threatening sense. A statement, an instruction. She was telling Webb not to move south. Calloway went back through the engagement sequence with this framing. She had used non-fatal fire on Briggs. She had used doorframe fire on Hartley. She had used leg fire on Rafferty. 3 of the 4 precision shots, not counting Novak, had been deliberately non-fatal. She had a ratio of lethal to non-lethal fire of 1 to 3. For a marksman operating at this level, That ratio was a choice, not a limitation. She was managing this engagement, not executing it. The question was, toward what end? He pulled out his notebook analog, because the electronic systems were compromised, and drew a rough map of the positions. Alpha, pinned south. Bravo 1, pinned in the factory, west side. Bravo 2, pinned in the alley, east side. The municipal building, the mission objective, center north. She had pushed them into a triangle with the objective at the apex. She had cleared the approaches to the objective and driven the mission force into positions where they could observe the objective but not reach it. He looked at the map for a long time. She's not protecting herself, he thought. She's protecting the building. The first time anyone used the name was Alpha Team's Pruitt, speaking quietly to his element while they held position behind the rubble field. He had served 3 deployments in environments where the name had circulated. Not as an official designation, no official designation existed, as far as anyone in the conventional force structure knew. It was the name that moved through informal networks, the after-action debrief language that never made it into written reports because what it described was not fully understood, and people do not write reports about things they cannot explain. Ghost of the Fog. Pruitt had heard it associated with 2 previous incidents. One in a coastal town, 18 months ago, where a 4-man reconnaissance element had been systematically maneuvered away from a specific building and held in place for 11 hours before being allowed to withdraw, all 4 men alive, none seriously wounded, the building undisturbed. One in a mountain transit route, 9 months ago, where a convoy had been redirected through a series of precision shots against tires and engines, no human casualties, and arrived at an unplanned route that avoided what turned out to be a prepared ambush. Both incidents, precision fire, non-lethal where possible, positional control rather than destruction. Both incidents, no confirmed shooter ID, no usable forensic evidence, no trajectory reconstruction that pointed to a consistent position. Both incidents, the word fog in the incident report, not because of actual meteorological conditions, but because the description of the engagement kept using the phrase appeared from and disappeared into, and eventually someone had written the shorthand. He had not connected the incidents to a single individual until this night. The voice on the radio had done that. The pattern of the fire had confirmed it. Ghost of the Fog, he said, to no one in particular, though his entire team heard him. A long pause. That's a real thing? Said one of his men. Pruitt looked at the municipal building, visible at the end of the street, its old concrete face pale against the falling snow. It's a real thing tonight, he said. What Pruitt did not say, what he could not say in a way that would be received without skepticism by men who were cold and pinned and had just watched colleagues get hit, was the part that genuinely frightened him, not the shooting. The shooting was explicable. The shooting was within the range of human excellence, if extreme. What frightened him was the preparation. Both previous incidents, when you looked at them from the outside, had the quality of something long planned. The terrain in the coastal town had been seeded with specific obstructions that channeled the recon element into a predictable corridor. The mountain convoy had been subtly misdirected by road marker alterations 3 days before it arrived. She did not operate on reaction time. She operated on preparation time, weeks, possibly months, spent learning a location well enough that her engagement of whatever force entered it was less a battle than a resolution of something she had already worked out in her head. The implication of this, which Pruitt did not say aloud, was that whatever force came into contact with her was not making decisions. They were executing decisions she had already made for them. They were moving through a landscape that had been shaped, in advance and with patience, to produce the outcome she had selected. He pressed his back against the rubble and watched the municipal building and tried very hard not to think about what was inside it that was worth all of this. The pattern analysis that Calloway had been performing in the alley was reaching the same conclusion from a different direction. He had not heard the name. He had the behavior, the non-lethal discipline, the positional control, the radio intercepts, the movement between positions that should have been physically difficult in the time frame available, and he was assembling what those behaviors indicated about the individual behind them. Not someone who had learned precision shooting in a military program and applied it tactically. Something older than that. Something that had been doing this long enough that the tactics had become intuitive. The positions pre-selected and prepared. The psychological dimension. The radio transmissions. The managed information, the selection of when to kill and when not to integrate it into the physical execution so seamlessly that there was no visible seam between the thinking and the doing. She's been here before the mission was planned, Calloway thought. She was here when we were still in the briefing room. He thought about the debris field, The partial building collapse that he had judged as recent months, not years. Someone had created a funnel in the approach route. Someone had, at some point in the months preceding this operation, shaped the physical terrain of this city to create preferred engagement corridors. He looked at the mouth of the alley, and at the square beyond it, and at the cathedral. She didn't choose this city, he thought. She made it. The decision belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Foster, made at 4:31 from the forward observation post, communicated through Webb as the senior operator on the ground. Calloway would cross the square, alone, moving slow, visible, not as an assault, as a signal, a flag, essentially. A statement that the force was no longer advancing on the objective and was willing to demonstrate that through the most unambiguous means available, putting a single man in the open. It was Webb's variation on Foster's original order, which had been a general withdrawal. Webb had pushed back. A withdrawal, he argued, required all elements to move simultaneously across ground that was currently controlled by the shooter. She could pick the order of engagement, could wound or kill at will during the movement. He proposed instead to offer her a test. One man, open ground, slow movement, hands visible. If she did not engage, they would have established a kind of communication not with words, but with fire discipline. They would know that the terms of the engagement were negotiable. Foster had said, "That's not a military tactic, Sergeant." Webb had said, "No sir, it's not." There had been a pause. "Proceed," Foster said. Calloway handed his weapon to Chen, checked his body armor by habit, and stepped into the mouth of the alley. He walked into the square at a pace that felt slower than anything he had done in a military context, hands away from his body. Weapon left behind, this was the part that took the most discipline. Not the walk itself, but the not having the rifle. He walked toward the cathedral. He did not look at the windows. He kept his eyes on the cathedral's main entrance, the old stone arch, the wooden doors that time and weather had cracked open. He had covered perhaps 40 meters when he stopped, not because of a shot, not because of a sound. He stopped because of the absence of something, the absence of the feeling of being in a firing solution. He had been in enough engagements to have developed a sense of that. Irrational perhaps, but real in the way that the sense of a watching eye is real. For the past hour, that sense had been constant and absolute, a pressure at the back of his skull. It was gone. He turned slowly. Behind him, on both sides of the square, the silence was complete. The snow fell. No movement, no shape in any window, no presence in any shadow. He took 3 more steps toward the cathedral. In his earpiece, Calloway. Webb's voice, strange, clipped. "She's not reacting, I know. Everywhere she's been, the east building, the tower approach, the factory line, they're empty. I've got Chen moving to get eyes, and it's coming back empty. She cleared out." "She didn't clear out," Calloway said. "A pause. She's done," he said. "She's finished. She got what she came for." Another pause, longer. "Which is what?" Webb said. Calloway stood in the center of the square, in the snow, with no weapon and no shooter and no sound but the wind. "We stopped," he said. "That's what she came for." He saw her once. It was not certain it was not, as he would later describe it in every conversation he had about this night, something he could swear to in any formal sense. It was a perception, and perception in those conditions was not reliable, and he knew this and assigned it the appropriate epistemic weight, and still he knew what he had seen. She came from the east building. Not the tower, not the cathedral. The east building, the one where Rafferty had been hit, the one that Chen had fired into and found empty. She came from it as though emerging from the wall itself, a figure that was at first only a change in the density of the falling snow, a vertical concentration where no vertical thing should be, and then resolved across approximately 3 seconds of looking into a person. A woman. Medium height. White, he thought, though the light was bad, and the distance was 90 meters and he was not certain. She was wearing something layered and muted that made her edges irregular and difficult to hold. She was carrying a rifle, he could see that much, in a carrying posture, not a firing posture. She was moving northeast, along the wall of the east building, parallel to the street, and she did not look at him. He did not call out. He did not reach for the weapon he didn't have. He stood in the center of the square and watched her, and she moved along the wall with a quality of motion that was, he searched for the word, and found it later, and knew it was the right one, unhurried. She was not fleeing. She was leaving. The distinction was absolute. She reached the corner of the east building and paused. Just for a moment, she turned her head and looked at the municipal building, and then she looked at the square, and then she was gone around the corner and the snow came down and the wall was empty. Calloway stood where he was for a long time. In his earpiece, Webb, Calloway, report. I saw her, he said. Where? He almost said, East building, northeast corner, 90 meters, call it in. He had the training for this, the language, the reflexes. He looked at the corner where she had been. She's gone, he said. It's over. Say again? It's over, Webb. He turned back toward the alley. Behind him, the square was empty and white, and the snow came down, and the city settled back into whatever it was when no one was in it. The sun came up at 6:47. It came up gray and slow, pushing through the cloud cover incrementally, not a sunrise so much as a brightening, the dark becoming less dark by degrees until there was something that could be called light. The snow had stopped at some point before dawn. No one had noted exactly when, because by that time the elements were consolidated, the wounded were stable, and the thing that everyone was doing was the thing that people do after something that doesn't resolve cleanly. They waited for the next thing to happen, and it didn't, and eventually the waiting became the situation. The casualty count: 1 killed, 3 wounded, Novak, Briggs, Rafferty, and a man from Alpha named Gareth Foster, no relation to the colonel who had caught a ricochet fragment in the hand during the period of contact near the rubble field. All 3 wounded had been triaged and were stable for movement. The mission objective, the communications relay station in the municipal building, had not been reached. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Foster arrived at 7:15, by vehicle, once the light was sufficient to confirm that no active threat remained in the approach corridors. He walked through the elements with the demeanor of a man assembling a narrative, collecting information less to understand what happened than to organize how it would be reported. He spent 8 minutes with Webb. He spent 4 minutes with Calloway. He asked questions, noted answers, and did not ask several questions that Calloway thought were more important than the ones he asked. At 8:30, elements began withdrawing on the eastern route. Calloway, moving last with rear security, passed through the square where he had seen her. The snow lay undisturbed now, the wind having calmed and the fresh fall having filled everything in. The east building stood quiet, its windows dark, its wall blank. He looked at the northeast corner. He stopped. Embedded in the corner joint of the wall, at approximately chest height, was a single round. Not the brass, the projectile itself, the lead bullet, driven into the mortar line between 2 blocks and lodged there with enough of it protruding to be visible if you were looking. He looked at it for several seconds. Then he looked at the shape of it, a heavy subsonic slug, flattened slightly on the nose, the kind that a precision-suppressed platform throws at the velocity that makes no noise worth hearing, carved into the lead with something sharp, precise enough to be deliberate. 2 letters. T-Def. He stood there in the morning light and looked at it. Someone behind him, one of Alpha's men. He didn't look to see who said, "What is it?" Calloway reached out and touched the round with 1 finger. Just for a moment. "Nothing," he said. He left it where it was. The formal after-action report, filed 9 days later, attributed the engagement to an unknown hostile element utilizing precision-suppressed fire and advanced positional tactics. The threat assessment section concluded, threat was likely a single operator with specialized equipment and advanced knowledge of the urban terrain. The forensics section concluded, no usable evidence collected from identified firing positions. All positions had been cleared prior to exploitation. The section on conclusions read, unit engaged by unknown entity. Nature of entity's operational affiliation remains undetermined. Intent ambiguous engagement pattern inconsistent with standard combat doctrine. Non-lethal fire ratio suggests possible objective other than maximum force application against friendly unit. Recommend further analysis. Further analysis was requested. Further analysis was not completed. The name Ghost of the Fog did not appear anywhere in the written record. It appeared in the conversations that happened after the ones that do not get written down, that pass between people who were there through the networks of trust and shared experience that exist alongside the official record and outlast it. It appeared in the way that names of that kind appear, not with certainty, not with verification, but with the weight of people who have looked at a set of facts and arrived at a conclusion they cannot prove and cannot shake. She had been in the city before them. She had shaped the ground. She had read their approach, their radio traffic, their decision-making patterns, and she had managed the engagement with a degree of control that Calloway, in all his subsequent deployments and all his subsequent consideration of what had happened that night, could not attribute to tactical skill alone. Tactical skill is a component of what she had demonstrated, but what she had demonstrated was something larger than skill. It was something like authority. the authority of a person who understands an environment so completely that the environment becomes an extension of their will. She had not tried to destroy the unit. She had not tried to drive them out. She had, in the simplest possible summary, told them no in the language available to her, which was the language of fire and position and radio silence and the careful selection of which shots to take and which to withhold. She had said no to the mission objective with a precision and economy that Calloway could not find a better word for than elegant. And they had listened. Novak was buried with full military honors at a cemetery in Ohio, in a small city that had not known his name when he was alive and now displayed it on a local memorial along with the names of 17 other young men from the same county. His mother attended, his sister attended. His father, who was not well, attended in a wheelchair and stood for the flag presentation with a physical determination that Calloway, who was there, would not forget. Calloway did not mention the ghost of the fog at the funeral. He did not mention the carved letters or the single bullet lodged in the corner of a wall in an abandoned city a long way away. He stood at attention and received the folded flag on behalf of the unit and handed it to Novak's mother, and said what there was to say. On the drive back, alone, he thought about the square. He thought about the way she had moved along the wall, the quality of it, unhurried. He had identified the right word, but in the weeks since he had wondered if there was a better one, and what he kept arriving at was something slightly different from unhurried, certain. She had moved with certainty, the certainty of someone who knows exactly where they are and exactly where they are going, and has nothing to prove in the space between those 2 points. He thought about the single bullet with the 2 letters. He thought, she left a signature. Not for the record, not for the report, for whoever found it. A signature is addressed to someone. He had been the last man through the square. He thought about that for a long time, on the road back through a landscape that was beginning to turn towards spring, the snow retreating from the fields, the bare trees beginning the first tentative suggestion of leaf, and he did not arrive at a conclusion, because there was no conclusion to arrive at. There was only what had happened, and the gap between what had happened and what was understood, and the bullet lodged in a wall in an empty city with 2 letters carved into the lead. There were people, he knew, who would spend careers trying to find her, people who would compile the incident reports and cross-reference the forensic data and build timelines and geographic overlays and probability models. They would have resources that he did not have and institutional authority that he did not have, and they would work at it with genuine intelligence and persistence. He did not doubt any of that. What he doubted was whether any of it would result in what they were looking for. You do not find a person who does not want to be found by looking for that person. You find them by understanding what they are protecting, and then you understand whether what they are protecting is something that should be protected. Those were 2 different questions, and the second one was harder than the first, and it was the second one that the reports were not asking. He did not know what was in the municipal building. He was not sure he wanted to. TTF. Ghost of the fog. She was somewhere. She was, presumably, already in the next city, or already waiting in the one after that in the snow, in the silence, in the pre-dawn cold, before an approach force entered the urban terrain that she had already mapped and prepared and made her own. She was there before you arrived. She would still be there after you left. That was the thing about the fog. That was the thing that no after-action report, and no threat assessment matrix, and no probability model could fully account for. The fog is not weather. The fog is condition. It is the state of an environment when visibility fails and familiarity fails and training fails, when all the systems and protocols that transform a collection of individuals into a fighting unit begin to depend on assumptions that no longer hold. The fog is where you discover that the map and the territory are different. The fog is where you discover that the plan and the situation are different. The fog is where you discover, if you are honest enough to discover it, that you were never as in control as you believed. She had not created the fog. She had simply been the one who understood it. You don't see it until you're already inside it, and by then, she has already seen you.